I'm Clifford Bates, and welcome once again to reading Machiavelli's Prince. Today's chapter, uh, uh, 17, we were looking at the question of continuing on the examining of the characteristics. This is the third chapter. Last chapter, starting with chapter 15, which we get this question of qualities of the prince, the question of qualities of virtues and vices. We then turned last chapter to the debate between liberality and stinginess. Now we're going to deal with the question of cruelty and pity, and that leads us to a question. And is it better? The title says of cruelty and pity, and is it better to? This is interesting. The title is that, and then it leads to a question: is it better to be loved than feared, or the contrary? Okay, right. Um, this is a chapter that has divided honestly into. This is a longish chapter, not as long as some other chapter coming ahead, but this is giving us a basically divided into was it six? Oh no, seven paragraphs in the Italian. So let's go look through it. Let's go. The first paragraph is a longish one. This is on this page. Descending then to the other previously mentioned qualities. Remember the different qualities that he mentioned in chapter 15. Uh, I say that every prince ought to be desired to be full of pity and not held to be cruel. Nevertheless, he ought to take heed that he does not use pity badly. Now, remember what he said. We did cruelty. The danger of failing and succumbing hatred earlier in the way back there, a couple of chapters earlier, about wickedness, right? The question of wickedness. He leads us to a very important rule about wickedness, and that is not using cruel. The reason that you become perceived as infamous and really hated is not that you're using violence and wickedness, but using wickedness badly. We can use cruelty badly, right? Now here he uses the word pity badly. In other words, is that what he said earlier, and I forget in the chapter of wickedness, on the discussion of what is it? Let's pick my print copy of the Prince. The Principate through back in chapter 8, all the way back there. You can go check out the video again. If you want to go check it out, please go. Go over it. What about wickedness in that sense? You see, it's the idea of cruelty well used versus badly used, right? That the violence. Remember, he has a very good. Now the switch of this is pity. He take heed and he not use pity badly. Right. That's how he ends the sentence. Pity. What is pity is a very important thing here. And there's a big note in de Alvarez here, and I think it's very important because pity, and I'm going to put my glasses on and do it. Maybe I should, okay, maybe I should just go, why don't you use the text? No, we have this, we can use this. The word here is piestro. The Machiavelli uses the word piesta and piestro, which are usually translated as mercy and merciful. So again, this leads us directly to the benefice and other things. Mercy, right? The question of mercy. In fact, Seneca has an essay on mercy, mercy, right? There's a very treatise, a separate set, a thing on mercy. Very important Christian virtue at mercy, right? And merciful, which usually translates as mercy, merciful. But these terms are more accurately translated as piety and piteous. So piety, in other words, pity has this double weird name. Piety here has a meaning now obsolete of pity. In other words, piety, which we think the obedience of God, right? Care for the divine things, or piety, believing, how holy you are, had an older meaning in the conception, which it's obsolete, of pity and or mercy. It is also refers to man's godliness or religious devotion. This is how it's currently used. And a piteous man could be pious or merciful. Could be either a piteous man could be either pious or merciful, or both pious and merciful, right? The choice then is between being cruel on the one hand and being piteous or full of pity on the other. In chapter 21, where Ferdinand of Spain is said to be turned into a pious cruelty or cruel pity. A cruel pity would seem to be the pity that, as the remark on the Florentine people would imply, which led to a greater cruelty being done. A cruel pity would then be distinguished from a cruelty well used, back in chapter 8, right? A cruel pity would be a opposite, a kind of a distinguished from a cruelty you use. And therefore, this leads us to what's so shocking about this thing here is that it is directly towards this question of pity here. That we're left with the thing about well used. Now he then goes, Cesare Borgia was held to be cruel. Nevertheless, that cruelty of his repaired the Romalia, united it, reduced it to peace and faith. Now, here, remember, this is what he's talking about here. This is a bit, remember, all the way back there with the example in, was it, I think, of fortune, new princes based upon the arms of others, right? This is the example of Marco di Orco, which is in the eighth paragraph. It's on page 45 of the Alvarez translation, where he talks about Ramesso di Orco was his instrument of that he did all these things. Remember, go compare. So therefore, at one level, it was Diorco who did it, and by killing Diorco, how Diorco's death happened, right, left the people satisfied and stupefied, right, seems to satisfy them in that sense. But he is still held to be cruel because of what he did, right, of how he used Marco Diorco, right, and what he did to Marco Diorco would be cruel, right. But he united it under faith and peace. That's interesting. So therefore, this is even double more sense that there was the use of cruelty. In other words, to reduce, that is, to restore, bringing back, with the implication of compulsion, as was reduced the towns into ruin. Machiavelli previously said that his credo is cruelty well used, right, in chapter 8. And arms making men believe, right? The chapter 6, and as well as good arms making good laws in chapter 12, right? We are left with a very important metaphor here of this idea of that. Okay, you're going to use violence, you're going to use compulsion. This will get you what? Fear. You get the name of cruelty here. If one will consider this well, one will see that he had much more pity, that Borgia, who was cruel, had more pity than the Florentine people, who, in order to avoid the name of cruelty, let Pistora be destroyed. Let's go read that again. 3. Pistora was divided between factions, and instead of extinguishing them, as Borgia extinguished the lords of Romalia, the Florentines permitted the disorders to continue, letting the factions of the city destroy one another. The consequence was Pistora was torn apart by riots, and the city suffered greatly. See, again, he talks about this in chapter 20. So therefore, the Cesare Remember, Caesarea had the Dramalia was full of factions, right? He said that in the chapter about the, he talked about all the way back in all the way back in chapter 7, right? All the way back in chapter 7, we're reminded that Caesarea destroyed, extinguished the factions in order to bring order and unity. The Florentines kept the factions, maintained them, allowed them to destroy the city, leaving nothing behind, right? Let Baton be destroyed. Therefore, a prince, in other words, they were example of this is or Borgia is held to be cruel. Florence, the Florentine people are held to be full of pity. Right? And he says, therefore, a prince ought not to care of the infamy of cruelty with respect to keeping his subjects united and faithful. So if you're going to want to keep your subjects united and faithful, you shouldn't worry about incurring the name of infamy, cruelty. For with a few examples, he will examples of cruelty, with few examples of cruelty, he will be able to show more pity than those who, by too much pity, allow disorders to follow, from which arise murders, rapine, because these usually harm the entire body, right? That's the whole. Again, this is four here is interesting because he says, de Alvarez no Universitat inventa, so the university, the whole university, universal interior. What Machiavelli seems to mean is the entire body or corporation of society will be harmed. Again, this is a very powerful critique, right? That those who usually these rapines, in other words, the mercy and pity allows the disorder, which then arises murder, rapines. It's like, come on, east of America. Oh, we're going to let all these nice immigrants into our country. Well, let these poor people from Africa and South America who's fleeing from misery, let them all come to our country. And what happens? Crime rates rise, robbery, rapes, violence. The society collapses. The nice liberal who's pious and crying for these immigrants. Oh God, we need to be merciful. And then they don't. Their mercy then leads to the death and destruction of others. This is the lesson Machiavelli wants to warn you, that their pity and their mercy, those who are being noble and virtuous and pitiful, are being good Christian, are really doing evil by their actions. Whereas the person who is, the person who is the more virtuous? The piteous one, or the one who's saying, no, go away, we're going to deport you, get the hell out of Dodge? Which is going to ultimately produce less violence and less harm? Sorry, the latter, not the former. Sorry, the former produces more harm, more destruction. Therefore, a prince ought not to care about infamy of cruelty with respect to keeping his subjects united and faithful. For with a very few examples of cruelty, he will be able to show them more pity than those who, by too much pity, allow disorders to follow, and from which arise murders, rapines, because these usually harm the entire body. While the executions which come from a prince harm someone in particular. In other words, the prince's cruelty harms particular people. Dun, 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 dun. And leaves everyone else better. Again, remember the discussion of back in chapter 7 about cruelty, about the killing. When you have to kill, you kill everyone. The hesitative killer who then just a little bit of violence, and then what happens is violence is all the time, right? Here, I know everything I need to do by the violence, and everyone forgets the violence. Maximum benefit, everyone benefits, and voila. Whereas no one is benefiting from the little violence. Here, the pity produces no benefit. It only produces harm, harm, harm. Let's continue here. He says that these executions come from a prince that harms someone particular, whereas these doing a pity creates disorder and misery that harms the whole party. So let's go continue here this section and finish this first paragraph off. And of all princes, it is especially impossible for a new prince to avoid the name of cruelty, because these states are full of danger. So a new state, the new prince always will face. He cannot escape the name of cruelty, because these states are always in danger. And Virgil, through the might of Dido, because he's quoting the Iliad, right? The Iliad, the Aeneid, the great poetry by Virgil, the Aeneid. Virgil, through his Dido's mouth of Dido, says, "Difficult things, and a new reign forced me to take such measures to defend the boundaries all around." Right, this is that line from Dido, who's defending her idea of what she has to do. Um, here, again, Aeneid, Book 1, lines 563 and 564. So let's go next to our next paragraph. Nevertheless, one ought to be deliberate. In other words, nevertheless, he ought to be deliberative in belief and action, nor should he make fear for himself. And he should proceed in such a mode tempered with prudence and humanity, so that too much confidence not make him incautious, and too much diffidence makes him intolerable. In other words, this very important paragraph just explains that yes, you should be cruel. You shouldn't worry about being cruel if it's going to keep the people thing, and you're always going to have to do that. But then what? He should deliberate here. Now, this is, again, the notes here are useful, because he talks about in 6 to be judicious in giving belief. And the older translation is that to be judicious in giving belief to anything. Right. This is the Ducas's translation from the 40s. Anything and moving threats himself. Machiavelli seems to mean that a prince must show himself to be a serious man in his outward conduct. Because you have to be serious in his outward conduct. In other words, you can't be light, and you have to be serious. You have to be taken seriously. So you have to be deliberate in belief and action, right? 7. This line is ne de feres pector si. So therefore, this idea that makes, in other words, nor should he make himself fear for himself, right? And this is the Ducas older translation from the 1600s, 1640s. Not make his people extremely afraid of him, right? In other words, you shouldn't make the people afraid of him. He says, but the meaning seems to be not to be easily frightened too, right? Not to be, that is, not to make oneself afraid by manufacturing or imagining fears. So it's a twofold. Machiavelli's use of the word here is twofold. One is the external, what others see, and what the prince himself sees of himself. That the fear is that he should make fear for himself, not to be hated by others, feared by the subjects, but also not, that's not the issue. It's that you generate fears, that you become fearful of everything and become hesitant and like this, right? That's deliberative belief and act. That counters the deliberative. And he proceed in such a mode. He should proceed in this belief, deliberate and belief and action mode, without fear or creating undue fear, right? And be tempered with prudence and humanity, right? It's interesting. Not inhumanity, in humanity, beneficial. So not much confidence that makes him incautious, but not too much deficit that makes him intolerable. Now this is the aside, this virtuous moment, this eight, this middle ground. Now, one should perhaps de Alvarez reads this, and as I read de Alvarez here, I'm sorry, I'm going back and forth. Maybe I should use the screen, but I don't want to because I don't want to. One should perhaps also interpret the confidence and diffidence of the prince as referring not only to his opinion of others, that is, whether or not he excessively trusts or distrusts them, but in his opinion of his own powers. In other words, it's twofold. It's not only about how he views others, but how he views his own ability. So, in other words, he should not only be incautious, right? The incautious, bold without cautious, but also not to be so doubtful of it and diffident about this. Uh, out of this, he doesn't trust himself. A man who has too low an opinion of his virtues would make himself contemptible in the eyes of the people. Not to know one's own worth leads others to wonder about your capacities, and to be overly confident over one's power has its obvious dangers too. So therefore, too much doubt, too much Hamlet, then others will say, well, maybe he shouldn't lead us, right? Too much diffidence and doubt. But I have to say, if he's too bold, and then people start to say, that has its dangers also, right? So there's double sense. Third paragraph. From this arise a dispute. So this is we get the discussion of pity, and we get the discussion of cruelty and pity, right? But then we get a question. Second part of the title, right? From this arises a dispute whether it is better to be loved than feared, or the reverse. So we have a question. The second part, starting in paragraph 3, we get the question, right? One may respond that one would wish to be both the one and the other. But since it is difficult to mix these qualities together, it is safer to be feared than loved, if one of the two must be lacking. So ideally, both loved and feared. Think about this. Is God only loved? God is also feared. God in the perfect thing of a God, or this the awe of God is emerging. That the majesty and might of God is both a complete intersection of fear, because God's majesty awe overpowers, and you remember the beginning of wisdom. The line is the beginning of wisdom is fear of God, right? Uh, 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 Likewise, love, right? God's benevolence or love of God is, to love of God. So this double thing, that the divine ideal is the ideal, but it's not possible to mix these things in human things, right? That well. So it's safer to be feared than loved. If one of these must be lacking, one of the two must be lacking, it's better feared than loved. For one can say this generally of men. So what about men? This is great. Human beings. This is human beings. Also men, can say. They are ungrateful, fickle, hypocrites, and dissemblers, evaders of danger, lovers of gain. While you, and I think this is personal again, check. Yikes. While you, 9. Second person familiar again, the familiar, right? You, hey, guy, intimate, you do them good. They are wholly yours, offering blood, gifts, life, sons. In other words, you give them why you do them good. They will offer you blood, goods, life, and sons, as been said above, and that is chapter 10 is chapter 9, 9 above, right? Go back in chapter 9 about the fickleness of the people, right? But they'll promise you things when things are far off, right? Has been said above, when the need is far off, but when it approaches you, they revolt. So therefore, this last thing is the last category. They promise you all these great things, these four things. So therefore, we have this very interesting thing there: grateful, ungrateful, fickle, hypocrites, dissemblers, innovators of dangers, lovers of gain. But then what else? They promise you all these great things when they're off, but they abandon you when they are there, right, when they revolt when the danger is right there, right? And the prince who founds himself wholly on their words, not he founds himself on them, the people, but on their words. This is important. You have to pay attention to the exact meaning of what Machiavelli says here. On their only promises, their words and promises. Their words are meaningless. Actions matter. Their actions, based on their actions, what they do. In other words, don't trust their words or promises, trust their actions. Their ruin. In other words, as Prince who founds himself wholly on their words, he finds himself naked in other preparations. So he hasn't done anything other, and if he has no other preparations, he's naked in other preparations. He's only requiring their words, their promises. What? He will be ruined. He will be ruined. For friends, in other words, this is a wonderful line. This is that great line. And this is an attack on maybe some people. Oh my God, he's attacking Aristotle's discussion of friendship. No, but he says, for friends which are one acquires for a price, and not with greatness and nobility of mind. One merits them, but one does not have them. And when time comes, they cannot be spent. Whoa, think about this, what he says, Machiavelli. What is the purpose of friends? To spend them. When you're after, you need them. They're your resource. If you get them from utility or pleasure, what kind of friend? Remember the friendships of utility means benefit, goods. I give you things. I buy you. Friendships of pleasure, buy you with pleasures. Remember the other virtue, the things of good virtue. Therefore, only the friends of virtue, the friends who are truly good, will die for you, right? That's the whole thing. In other words, the ones who pleasure, yes, dying is not pleasurable. So bye bye. Utility, good dying is not utility for me. So bye bye. Only the friends that you merit those utility and friend, those other ones that you buy, either through pleasure or utility. You merit them, but you can't spend them. They won't go. They'll abandon you. It's only those friends who are really good friends. Those are the resources that then you can use them to do the thing that needs to be done at that moment. In other words, when time comes, they cannot be spent. And men are less cautious about offending one who has made himself love. In other words, this is a wonderful line. Men are less cautious about offending the one who has made himself love than than one who has made himself feared. Semicolon. For love is maintained by a chain of obligation, which, because of men's wickedness, is broken on every occasion of their own utility. But fear is maintained by the dread of punishment that never abandons you. In other words, fear is you're going to be punished. Oh, I better do it. Fear is you can't abandon the fear. The fear that I'm going to get punished. Something's going to happen. Oh my God! If I don't do what he does, I'm going to get punished. Love, okay, great. I want to help you. I want to do charitable things for you, but I'm sorry, my interest stops here. That's the danger. My own love of myself stops charity. Charity, love of the chain. In other words, this love is maintained by chains of obligation. Because of man's wickedness or weakness, what happens? That it's broken. The chain's broke. The obligation is broken. Why? Because it's not strong enough. It's not of love, it's care. I love you. I'm going to help you. I promise. Here's a promise. I'll help you. Well, I do it out of care and charity. Great. What happens when it's going to cost me too much, or the price is going to be too high? It's going to be most people who are not good are going to break it. That's the whole point. They're not going to deliver on. They're going to, sorry, no. That's why most friends won't. Most of the friends won't show up. This is that famous line: "Only when you're in the worst." As a country western song, I forget by the singer. Know who your friends. You'll know who your friends are. When you're out in your luck, everyone hates you, and you're out and about. You're broke in the middle of the road, and who's going to come to your help? It's going to be the real friends, not the pretend friends or people, this fair weather friends. In fact, this is that line that even Tom Paine talks about the patriot. There's fair weather patriots and real patriots. The fair weather patriots promise you like everything. This is in his book, essay, "The Crisis," the famous that George Washington paid to have during the height of Valley Forge, the winter of Valley Forge. He wrote this thing, the crisis for this moment, and Paine writes this great, wonderful line that the sunshine patriot, the sun, this person, disappears when the real things get dark and needed. As the real patriot is there when the times are tough and committed himself. That therefore, this is the problem with that. This is that danger here. But what is this? But Machiavelli, this is the liberal position. This is Hobbes. So you have to understand, fear is what makes obligation. This we should understand back in Hobbes' law. Hobbes' law, what really keeps the social contract working? The fear of going back to the state of nature. The fear of the violence and chaos of the state of nature. Oh God, please! The creation of the social contract is, and the creation of the social body is the escaping of nature out of fear. Fear is ultimate liberty. This is the ideal point of modern political thinking. Is fear motivates everything, and Machiavelli is thus really teaching us this important lesson here. Now, let's go look at the next chapter, next little paragraph. The prince, nevertheless, ought to make himself feared in such a mode that if he does not acquire love, then he avoids hatred. For being feared and not hated can go very well together, and he will always bring this about if he abstains from the good of his citizens and subjects and their women. Whoa. Don't touch their goods and don't touch their women. Their honor, in that sense. So this is the Italians would say this, the honor. This Aristotle speaks about this also, utility. Honor, property, their goods, their material goods, their utility, and their honor. Don't touch this, then you won't be hated. You touch someone's honor, and how you touch your honor is their women. In other words, that very famous things that a prince can what he says. He ought to make himself feared in such a mode. Nevertheless, the prince ought to make him feared in such a mode that if he's going to do this, right, he should not. If he does not acquire love, he avoids hatred. So it's not fear you should worry about; it's hatred you should worry about. And how do you avoid hatred? Is don't do anything that creates it. And what the two principal things that creating it, touching their goods, abstains from their goods and of his citizens and subjects and their women. If it should, now, this is one of the things. Go study Aristotle's Politics. Well, what are the things that lead to factional conflict and vengeance? So touching people's women and boyfriends are the clearest way that led to revenge and retaliation in the ancient world, right? It's going to be that this what drives the motives of people starting civil wars and starting factional revolts in the most political regimes. This is really discussed in Book 5 of the Politics, particularly in the later chapters, right? Revolutions, particularly in both monarchies and tyrannies, but also within aristocracies and even not so much republics, but among aristocracies and oligarchies, right? And if someone if it becomes needful to proceed against the blood of someone, in other words, it becomes needful, necessary to proceed against killing someone in their line, right? The blood of someone. He should do so when there is suitable justification and manifest cause. So if I have to go kill people, do it only when there's suitable justification and manifest cause. But above all, he should abstain from the goods of others. So if you're going to kill them, don't touch their goods. For men forget more quickly the death of a father than the loss of a patrimony, their estate, their family. The patrimony is the thing that the fathers have, the ancestors in their family. You can forgive the death of the father. If you, as long as you don't touch their property, don't touch their wealth, then you kill your enemy, but leave the family and their money alone. They'll forget. In other words, they'll quickly forget. They'll hate you for it, but they'll forget about it because they'll still get the benefit, right? That is that weird line. Moreover, the causes of taking goods are never lacking. And he who begins to live by rapine will always find cause of taking that which belongs to others. While on the contrary, causes to proceeding against the blood are very rare and quickly lacking. In other words, okay, rapine, taking things, taking what you want, constantly taking what belongs to you. That's to rapine, to rape. That is where the word rapine, to rape, to take. Rape is the taking of the person, right? I'm taking the person. I'm using the person for my use. This is what rape means. And to rapine is to take the property, the goods, and things, and by force. Okay. You keep on doing that. You're doing it. There's no end of it. These are many. In other words, the causes why you need to take something, infinite. I want that. The prudent person knows, well, no, I don't want, I know I want that, but it's not, the cost that doing that will be too bad for me. Okay. The cost benefit relationship of this does not merit doing it. So, no. The unprudent person will just, I want it, must have it, right? This is the destructive aspect of it. But what happens? The occasions of going against blood is rare. In other words, it's something that's not, in other words, I have to move against my enemies. They have to kill you. That's not going to be an everyday ordinary thing. It's going to be an extraordinary thing, right? It's going to be contrary. In other words, the contrary. In other words, there'll always be taking what belongs to others. Will always happen. I want things. I can always take it from you. I need more money to spend things. I can always take your things. These are infinite, right? So therefore, this leads men to be living by rapine. There's no limit to this, the justifications for this. But the need to go act against the blood of others is very rare and are very quickly lacking. And so therefore, you do it, don't take their money, right? So let's now turn to the next paragraph. I think this is what paragraph. I'll number them there. I number them in my edition. Yeah, paragraph 5, the 5th paragraph. But when the prince is with his armies and has multitudes of soldiers under his government, then is it wholly necessary not to care about the name of, in other words, but when the prince and his armies and has multitude of soldiers and under his government, then it's wholly necessary not to care about the name of cruelty. Why? You need to do this. You need to care about that. You have to keep discipline. You need to keep discipline. You need to keep order. Without that name, one cannot keep an army united or disposed of any great deed. In other words, this is another thing. This is a weird thing. Very homogeneous things. This is the famous in social science. If you have a very homogeneous, you don't need a lot of violence to hold it. In other words, a very large, everyone's similar, same homogeneous. There's not much need to have violence to hold together. When things are very heterogeneous, very diverse, then you need lots of violence to hold it together. Okay, it's a very important equation in understanding the level of violence in a society. That the more homogeneous the things are, the less violence there is. The more homogeneity, the less violence. The greater the heterogeneity, the greater the violence. Um, this is the danger here in this sense. Um, with In other words, then it is wholly necessary not to care about the name cruelty if you're going to hold things together. Without that name, one cannot keep his army united and disposed to any deed. In other words, and among the wonderful actions of Hannibal, right? Hannibal and his great army, or disposed. In other words, of Hannibal, one numbers this. In other words, of his Hannibals, right? Having a great army that was a mixture of infinite races of men, which he had conducted to war in alien lands, there never rose any dissension, neither among themselves nor against the prince, in bad as well as in good fortune. In other words, because of his example of Hannibal. Hannibal wrote this army of infinite number of people. In other words, infinite. That means highly uh, heterogeneous. Right? In other words, diverse. Infinitely number of races. And he did what? He brought them not only into an alien land, different place. And what is that? Never dissension arose, neither amongst themselves nor against the prince, in both bad fortune and good fortune. That lack of dissension could not have proceeded from anything other than his inhuman cruelty. His inhuman cruelty. In other words, in order to govern a extremely diverse people, in order them to accomplish great things and keep them from not rebelling and not in both good times and bad times, in dire situations, you need inhuman cruelty, which together with his infinite virtues always made him in the eyes of the soldiers venerable and terrible, venerated and terrible, this mixture. So what is Hannibal? Hannibal is both infinitely cruel and inhuman cruelty mixed with his infinite virtues. Mixed, and therefore, in the eyes of the soldiers, they were both venerated and terrible, terrified of him. Don't dare break. No, my God, I'm not going to break with him. You do one thing wrong, he impales you and slices you to death. You look at him wrong and slice that everyone's dead. No, 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 no. Let's not go piss Hannibal off. Okay, okay. We obey. We obey. We don't want to. We don't want to fight, boss. We don't want to. We agree with you. We're going to obey what you're doing. This is the danger of that. This is the inhuman cruelty. But this works only. He doesn't become a disaster only because of his infinite virtues. I mean, that's the difference between Vladimir Putin and Hannibal. Vladimir might be the man who does the infinite cruelty, but it has a cruelty. He can't go as bad as he might want to go, but he can't. Why? Because he doesn't have the virtues. He doesn't have infinite virtues. He has very limited virtues, and therefore this will lead to disaster in that sense as he becomes too cruel. He'll become inhumanly cruel, and therefore he will have the disaster. This is the danger of where cruelty creates hatred, right? Um, without the cruelty, without that cruelty, his other virtues would not have been sufficient to bring about that effect. In other words, keeping the army together, keeping the whole. In other words, without that, in other words, infinite, in other words, infinite virtues, infinite virtues. Let's go read this, right? Infinite virtues could not keep a diverse society, a highly diverse society of infinite races together, not fighting with each other, not quarreling with each other, dissenting or rebelling and things like that, both in bad times or good times. Only cruelty. So cruelty with the infinite, inhuman cruelty plus this. But without the inhuman cruelty, it would not have happened. Okay, like arms, right? This is that weird inverted thing. Um, and the writer on this point has insufficiently, and the writers on this point have insufficiently thought about it. On the one hand, they admire his actions, and on the other, they condemn the principal cause of this, right? That's the famous line. And this is, again, this is number 11. Now, that is, they admire his capacity to unite the army comprised of infinite races, but they condemn the cruelty which enables them to do it. This is, again, on Hannibal. Um, uh, 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 you know, look at the ancient writers who talk about Hannibal and how they refer to him. They admire him. The Roman ladders and Roman writers who talk about Hannibal will admire him, but they'll condemn him for his cruelty, but don't understand that the things that his admirable traits rest upon the cruelty. This is Machiavelli's insight. Now, next paragraph, and to see that it is true that his other virtues could not have sufficed. One can consider Scipio Africanus, the hero, Scipio, Cicero's dream. Scipio Africanus is the kind of hero of this moment. Scipio's dream, and that's published in the Des Republica, or survival extracts of that. Scipio Africanus is the hero. That's even Cicero. That Plutarch's Lives talks about the great person who defeats Hannibal, not in Rome but in Africa, right? His time in Spain, right? In other words, if one considers Scipio a most rare man, not only of his time but of in the memory of all things that are known. So remember, everyone likes to praise Scipio as being a very good man, very remarkable man, timeless person, right? His armies rebelled in Spain, and this did not proceed from anything other than his excessive pity. In other words, his pity, which permitted his soldiers more license than was fitting for military discipline. So he wouldn't punish people. He wouldn't do it. He was too nice to people. He was too nice. He was too pity. His lackness of discipline. His pity led him to a lackness of discipline, and that created rebellion. Right. This brought him reproof from Fabius Maximus. Right. Fabius Maximus. Right. Quintin Fabius Maximus, right? In fact, Machiavelli will talk about him in Discourse 1, book 1, chapter 53, and book 3, 9. Book 3 of Discourses, chapter 19. Chapter 9, sorry, 9. But Machiavelli treats the two Fabii, Fabius, right, as if they were one, more precisely as if they were alike in kind, right? That's the problem with this, the Fabians, right? The others, the earliest Fabius is Quintius, Fabius Maximum Romanus, for which the other one is Fabius Quintius, who was the great opponent of Hannibal in the Second Punic War. Fabius Remelus was consul several times in the period of the Samnite War. So therefore, there's 2 points of this. The Famites, he was criticized for this, and that he was, in other words, he was brought refute, right? This brought him reproof from Fabius Maximus in the Senate, and he who called the corrupter of the Roman militia, right? And so that he was criticized for this by Fabius, the great Fabius, which Machiavelli wants to blur the two different Fabius. This is here, right? And the Locrians, whose city had been sacked by Scipio's legate, were not avenged by him, nor was the insolence of the legate corrected. So his legate went to a town, they ravaged, and they did this. They broke a legate, and they didn't do it. And this is the very thing. The officer was Quintin Plimus, legus pro praetor in 205 BC. He looted Blocae, not sparing the treasury of the goddesses, Persephone. Scorpio kept him in command, and the Senate had to intervene, arresting and imprisoning the man. Okay, so therefore, in other words, that they did not punish the legate. Legate did something. He rooted a thing, and did this, and didn't punish him for his bad action, and the Senate had to intervene and punish him. All of which proceeded from his easy nature, to such an extent that someone in the Senate who wished to excuse him. I think this is interesting. I think this is Rousseau. No. Who's 14? It's not 14. One of the ambassadors of Locri, who said that who's going to excuse him, said that there were many men who knew better how not to err than how to correct errors. In other words, it was easy not to err, but then to correct errors. In other words, okay, but that's great. And he says, this nature of his would have in time wronged Scipio in fame and glory, had he continued it with imperium. But since he lived under the government of the Senate, this harmful quality was not only hidden, but brought him glory. Now, this is interesting. 15, in other words, bring him into empire. In other words, if people understand that brings him into the empire, no, but brings him into power. If he sought to do in other words, if Scorpio sought to do what Caesar would have done, he would never succeed. Why? Because he'd only fail. It would destroy him. These things, this would not allow. He could not do it. He could not accomplish it. Would not have brought him glory. In other words, that one could read the passage, the nature of which would have brought have in time wronged Scipio's fame and glory, had he continued into the empire with it. That's his Muller translation, but that's wrong. But imperium here is the supreme command, and seems more literal meaning, likely meaning in that sense. This is right. The final judgment of Scorpio cannot be made until after carefully considering the discussion of cruelty and pity, which he examine again in Discourses 3, right, 19 through 22, chapters 19 through 22, where he again in more depth looks at Scipio. The comparison between Hannibal and Scipio, between a cruel nature and an easy one, can be found in Discourse 3, chapter 21, right, which is the 19, 28, 20, is the penultimate chapter of that. Scipio's problem is what? As long as if Scipio was the leader of a thing, he would be a disaster. If he was not policed and governed by our Senate government. In other words, the civic structure turns what would be a deficiency as a leader as a necessary quite. It brings him glory. His pity is his character. What would bring him destruction. In other words, in time wrong Scipio's fame and glory, would have harmed him. Brings him glory because of the governance of the republic. Okay, This is how Machiavelli reads this. Machiavelli, thus you look at Scipio's piety. I mean, you can see this in the difference. Democratic societies cannot tolerate a George Patton. Why? He's too cruel. Patton understood in order to get a diverse political thing to win these victories, you needed to use a little bit of coercion and cruelty, not the levels of cruelty that Hannibal uses, but much more than Eisenhower. The famous slapping of the soldier, right? That famous slapping incidents, and he needed the discipline. That was necessary. That one could look at what was happening. A democratic army who just got even just previously in North Africa had its ass handed to it at Kasserine Pass to the Germans. The Americans were a disaster. Patton kind of got them into shape to be able to fight them. But the Germans are leaving. The Germans were not going to fight there and fight hard. In Sicily, they were, and the decision was that instead of fighting the Sicilian campaign the way Patton wanted, he was forced to fight Montgomery's way, which was going to be a disaster for the Americans were going to get slaughtered protecting Montgomery, and Montgomery would get all the glory. So what Patton does is but that would require him to leave half his army to do the job of the whole army, take casualties, and then they keep the morale up, and to take the other to do these a massive push, which he they needed more things. In other words, he had to demand more than they could, so he had to be cruel to accomplish that. He needed to scare the shit out of everyone because not only the Germans were going to fight hard. It wasn't they were going to fight less; they were fighting hard. And that's and democratic societies don't like that. Egalitarian societies don't. Well, this is why the media, democratic culture back home, when they heard about the slapping incident, it was oh my God, how dare he? He's a Nazi! He's a Nazi, right? And generals like Eisenhower and Bradley, who were kind of like careful and will slaughter more men, cause more men to die. This is Bradley in Normandy ended up killing more soldiers than I think probably if Patton was given. In fact, Patton's breakthrough was the idea that Bradley had that led to the breakthrough was always Patton's idea, and they let Patton do it because they only knew Patton could do it, and Patton achieved more than they thought they could. Under Bradley's leadership, they were behind Normandy timeline, the Overlord timeline, where with Patton they were way above it, and they didn't like being above it, right? All their planning and organization and things like this. So therefore, we have to understand the danger here of Scipio. The Scipio is a wonderful general. He can be a good general because he's merciful. The democratic society loves him as long as he's Republican. He is, in other words, his vice. But if he tries to become an imperial leader, it will destroy. He couldn't do it. He couldn't take the imperium. He couldn't be a leader. You couldn't use him as an example of leadership. It will be a disaster. It's a useful example of a subordinate officer in a republic. In other words, he's going to be the person who is civil. In other words, Scipio is only tolerable as an example of leadership in a republican form. Once you take his form as a pure form, it'll disaster without the republican oversight and control and governance. He needs someone to govern him. He is imperfect. He ends the chapter, Machiavelli does, this thing, the last paragraph. I conclude that, returning to the question of being feared or loved. So he returns us to the question and voiced it. He gave us the example of Scipio and Hannibal, right? As a mid-break of this idea of what is fear, what is pure cruelty, and like this. And he says, I'm going to return to the question of being feared or loved. And since men love at their own pleasure and fear at the prince's pleasure, a wise prince should found himself on that which is his. and on not on that which is dependent upon others. He ought to only contrive to avoid hatred, has been said. In other words, remember, go back. The principal thing is your own. Virtue, your own. In other words, it's better to not rely on fortune. Don't rely on fortune, rely on your own virtue, your own resources. In other words, don't depend upon others. Don't use allies or mercenaries, not yours. Rely on yours, right? Arms. But it's going to be my arms better be my own arms. It's always better that it's your own. If taking this principle now, applying it to here, fear, in other words, love depends. Love always is subjective. I'm sorry. You can't force someone to love you. I'm sorry. No, in other words, it's the loving of you is dependent upon the other person. It's not yours to control. But them being scared the shit out of you, that's yours to control. That's yours. Fear is yours. So that he says, being feared or loved, since men love at their own pleasure, fear at my person who has no power and control, the prince's pleasure. I can't control your love. I can control your fear. Therefore, a wise prince ought to rely on what is his, not on what depends on others, on the control of others. One's own arms. And he ought to what? Just to do what? Avoid hatred, as been said. So let's stop here. Put any comments or questions you have about this chapter down below, and we'll respond to it when I see them. If you like it, hit the like button. If you didn't like it, okay, you can always down throw it like this, and put Y in the comments. But if you liked it, hit the like button. Helps the algorithm. If you liked it, share it. Share it in your social media. Share it far and wide. If you've not subscribed, please consider subscribing. Encourage your friends to come look at the channel. Bring a friend to come check it. Word of mouth, word of email, word of social media. Check it out. Come check out this, the Prince reading or any other of the things we've discussed. Those of you who want to do Locke, you can go check out the Locke reading. Those of you doing Aristotle, you can check out Aristotle. Even Thucydides, we've dealt with Sun Tzu. We did a lot of things here in this Montesquieu. Go check us out. Encourage them to come. Subscribe. Another thing you can do is if you want to, like I said, I didn't like it, say why in the comments, right? Another thing you can do is if you want to follow me on social media, the social media links are below. Another thing you can do is you want to know more about me as a scholar and a researcher and check out my research and things like that. You can check out below the social media, the academic social media links. You can check them out. Go check it out. Go check it out. It helps. Another thing you can do is you can help me. Want to contribute and help me financially in the sense, or financial. Make a contribution. You can do so many ways. One way is through Patreon or Subscribestar. You can become big for just a little bit of money. You can do it maybe one or two. I did it for one, but you can do it like on a ratio. I forget. I think I still have it like $1. So $2. I don't know what it was. I don't have a big. I don't have the big thing. Another thing you can do is you can buy one of my books. Okay, the social links to Patreon or subscribers are listed below. The URLs are there. You can order one of my books. List the books that are currently available there. You can order it through an online. Now you order it through a local bookstore, of course, but you can also order it online distributor like Amazon, Barnes & Noble, etc. Or you can go to the publishers. Well, that's it. We'll turn next to chapter 18, which looks at. I think it's. What is 18 in that sense? It's 18 is. Remember that is faith. The infamous faith chapter. How do princes keep their faith, right? So let's stop here, and we'll see you later. Bye-bye. Take care.